The fog came thick and silver-laced, curling through the cobbled paths like a living breath. It coiled around the ancient arches of the Crescent Tower, hugging the stone walls with a ghostly tenderness. Somewhere high above, the bells struck once, deep, slow, resonant, and the sound sank into the wet silence like a pebble into a still lake. Beneath that timeless tower, nestled within the folds of moss-covered cloisters, sat the Monastery of St. Elian, and within its quietest chamber, the scriptorum. A lone figure hunched over a desk of oak. The candlelight flickered with every breath he took. His hand, gloved in time-worn leather, hovered delicately over parchment. Fingers curled around an instrument of rare make. A silver-dipped quill feathered from the wing of a long-dead peregrine. Scratch, sweep, scratch. The sound of ink meeting vellum was like soft rain on a roof, steady, soothing. Brother Anselm, the monastery's only remaining horologist and master scribe, had been awake since the 6th hour. But time no longer tethered him. His life was ruled by more sacred rhythms, the slow breath of candle wax melting, the settling dust of the scriptorum, the hourly song of the clockworks high in the Crescent Tower. He paused, dipped the quill once more into an inkstone carved of obsidian. Its contents were not merely ink, but a blend of soot, oil, and powdered sapphire. It shimmered faintly, catching stray threads of moonlight. He resumed, shaping a capital letter A, wide and winged. Its interior filled with fine gold leaf like a sun rising within a cage of ink. Outside, wind whispered through ivy. A nightjar called once, and silence reclaimed its throne. The candle's flame danced in rhythm with the soft ticking of the gears embedded deep within the monastery walls, a rhythm known only to Brother Anselm, and perhaps in secret to the stones themselves. Beyond the walls of the scriptorum, the world had long forgotten such places existed, but within, time moved differently. It was slower, tender, shaped by ritual and reverence. The fog outside made it seem like the monastery floated, suspended in a cloud of silence. Anselm leaned back for a moment, cracking the stiffness from his fingers. He stared at the illuminated letter he had just completed. The A shone like a miniature sunrise, the powdered gold leaf catching the breath of the candle's light. Around it, he had traced a curling vine of blue and green, using crushed malachite and lapis lazuli, colors once so rare they were weighed like silver. To the untrained eye, it was merely a pretty page, but to Anselm, and to those long gone who trained his hand, each mark was a sacred act. The book he worked on now was The Hours of St. Elian, a prayer cycle meant to soothe both mind and spirit during the vigil hours. Fewer than 3 copies existed in the world. The silver quill, forged in the winter of his novitiate, had never left his side. Some whispered it was made from starlight and frost, its nib shaped by the abbey's last great metalsmith. But Anselm knew its truth, not mystical, but meticulous, just like the clocks he once tended. His mind drifted briefly to the tower, the Crescent Tower, tall and curved like a scythe, rising into the fog. Within it, a clock like no other ticked on, its mechanisms older than his memory. Once, in his youth, he had tended its gears, climbed its winding steps, oiled the teeth of the great iron cogs, but those days were behind him now. A fall from the bell loft had left his leg damaged, and so he remained grounded, wreathed in candlelight and parchment. He dipped the quill once more, this time into a tiny vial containing crushed garnet ink, reserved for the rubricated verses. As he traced the words, he whispered them under his breath. Domine, dirige me in lumine tuo. Lord, guide me in your light. The room seemed to listen, or perhaps it was simply the acoustics. the high arches above, gathering sound and releasing it like warm breath. The scriptorum had always held echoes gently. From behind him, the soft creak of wood. He turned, slowly, expecting no one. But no one came. It was likely the shifting of the ancient timbers, or the draught between the stones. Still he waited, hand still holding the quill above the parchment. Until all felt still again, he resumed. By midnight, the candle had burned low. Its light bent sideways, casting long, trembling shadows. Anselm reached toward the row of glass phials arranged beside him. One filled with powdered azurite, another with crushed amethyst. Each pigment had been made by hand, and each held a history that stretched backward centuries. He remembered the monks who had taught him this delicate art. Brother Matthias, who once taught him how to grind shells of whelk to make Tyrian purple. Brother Abel, who whispered secrets about using honey to preserve pigments for decades. They were gone now, their cells silent, their voices folded into the echo of the stone. Anselm was the last clockmaker, the last illuminator, the last keeper of the silver quill. He did not mourn this loneliness. It was not sorrow that filled the scriptorum, but stillness, and stillness was its own kind of grace. Outside, the wind lifted again, soft and searching. The fog pressed against the windows, gently, as though trying to peer in. And then, faintly, very faintly, a chime. Not from the bell, but from the tower. A different sound, a forgotten sound. It was the hour strike of the inner clock, the mechanism deep within the Crescent Tower that hadn't sounded in over 20 years. Anselm froze. He placed the quill gently down, like a relic returned to its altar. He listened. Tick. 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 The sound drifted downward, through ancient stone, like footsteps of a ghost returning to its chamber. Anselm stood, slowly. His leg trembled under his weight, the old injury flaring, but he walked to the arched window. The tower loomed in the moonlight, its top lost in the fog, but its presence was solid, like a sentinel, and from within, he heard it again, the heartbeat of a machine reawakened. A forgotten clock had begun to turn. But why now? And who had wound it? The air in the scriptorum had shifted. Brother Anselm felt it first in the candle's flame, no longer dancing but standing upright, still, as if listening. Then in the silence itself, which seemed deeper now, not just an absence of sound, but a presence in waiting. He stood by the arched window, fingers resting on the chilled stone sill, his breath fogging the ancient glass as he stared up at the Crescent Tower. The gears within had not moved in 2 decades. Since the Great Silence, the name the monks gave to the winter storm that froze the tower's heart and stole away 3 brothers, including the bellkeeper. Anselm had been one of the few survivors. He remembered the day the tower stopped, the final toll of the bell, the falling snow that muffled every sound like a funeral shroud. But now, tick, tick, tick. It was unmistakable. The inner clock was alive again, and not just ticking, it was measuring something, counting something. The rhythm wasn't idle. It pulsed with intent. He turned back toward his desk, the illumination half finished, and gently closed the manuscript. A monk never left a holy book uncovered. He placed a square of soft linen over the parchment, then wrapped the silver quill in its velvet sheath. The candle guttered once more, then blinked out, and for a breathless moment, the room was cast into darkness. But Anselm was not afraid. Darkness was an old friend. He lit a lantern and stepped into the cloister corridor, his footfalls soft on worn stone. The monastery at night was a kingdom of sighs and memory. The arches breathed, and distant winds slipped through the keyholes of time. As he passed the chapel, he paused. The doors stood open, a rare thing. The moonlight poured in through the stained glass windows, casting jeweled colors across the wooden pews. The great crucifix above the altar gleamed faintly, and something else shimmered beneath it. A child? No, not a child. A figure, still as sculpture. Anselm stepped closer. It was a young man in a long robe, not a monk's habit, but something similar. Fitted with brass cuffs and tiny threads of silver embroidery, shaped like cogs and suns, the figure turned. His face was pale, and his eyes were the color of antique copper. There was a clockmaker's glass loop hung around his neck, and his right hand held a winding key nearly a foot in length. "You heard it," the stranger said. It wasn't a question. It was a truth shared between them. "The tower," Anselm whispered. "The inner clock." The figure nodded slowly. "It has begun to count again." "What does it measure?" The stranger looked toward the stained glass. One window showed the Archangel Michael with a golden sword. Another the Wheel of Time surrounded by the 12 zodiac signs. "It measures return," he said simply. "Of what?" The stranger looked back at him. "Of knowledge, of memory, of the last hour." Anselm stared at him, searching his face for something familiar. "You're not from here." "I am," the young man said softly. "But not from now." They climbed the stairs of the Crescent Tower together. Each step creaked beneath Anselm's weight, the wood groaning with age. The stranger moved like a shadow, his robes whispering with each stride. As they ascended, the air grew cooler, the scent of old metal and oil wrapped around them. The gears were visible now, enormous iron teeth, polished to a dull gleam. Some were engraved with runes Anselm hadn't seen since his novitiate. Others had tiny celestial maps etched into them, signs of a forgotten order of timekeepers, lost before the monastery had even been built. Anselm reached out and touched a copper cog. It was warm. "You woke it," he said. "No," the stranger replied. "You did. Every line you wrote, every gilded verse, every stroke of the quill. You were winding it with memory." Anselm's heart thudded. "You mean the scriptorum feeds the clock?" "It always has." The stranger moved to the center of the tower, where a giant pendulum hung like a silken blade. Above it, the ceiling opened to the stars, veiled now in fog, but faintly luminous. The pendulum swung. Tick, 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 tick. And suddenly, Anselm could hear it. Not just the sound, but the rhythm of stories, of prayers, of ancient chants. The swinging was like a cradle rocking old knowledge awake. "You've been waiting," Anselm said, his voice dry with awe. The stranger smiled. "We've all been waiting." Then, from the far wall, a panel clicked open, an alcove lit with bluish light. Inside, an orb, not of glass, but crystal etched with scripts that shimmered faintly in the fog. The stranger stepped aside. "This," he said, "is the core of the clock." Anselm approached. He could see now, within the crystal orb were tiny particles, like dust motes, drifting in slow orbits. At the center, a single golden thread pulsed in rhythm with the pendulum. "The monastery, the tower, the books," Anselm whispered. "They're all connected." "Yes," the stranger said. "And you are the last keeper." The pendulum swayed like a dream suspended in time. Brother Anselm stood in quiet awe before the glowing orb nestled in the heart of the Crescent Tower. Within its crystal shell, thin filaments of gold and blue light drifted like ink in water, constantly moving, yet never dispersing. The orb's core pulsed steadily in harmony with the clock's rhythm, each pulse sounding deep within Anselm's chest, like the echo of his own heartbeat. The stranger stepped forward, robes brushing the stone floor. "This," he said again, voice hushed with reverence, "is the core of the clock. It is not a device, but a memory vault, a living one. Every word written in the scriptorum, every illuminated page, is preserved here. Not only the text, but the intent, the hope, the silence around the letters." Anselm's eyes widened. "The books. They are more than records," the stranger continued. "They are nourishment. To the tower, to the monastery, to the world that sleeps below the fog." Anselm turned to him slowly. "And I? I've been feeding it? For years, unknowingly, but not unchosen." Anselm's thoughts spiraled. He recalled every page he'd ever penned. Psalms etched with powdered gold, healing charms glossed in sapphire hues, chronicles of the Abbey's long-gone elders. He remembered the night hours, the hush between candle breaths, the way the silver quill always seemed to glide easier when he was most at peace. "Then, what happens now?" he asked. "Why has the core awakened?" The stranger's copper-colored eyes held a gentle gravity. "Because the cycle turns. Knowledge once stored must now be returned." "Returned to whom?" The young man stepped to the outer window of the tower. Beyond the misted panes, the hills slept under veils of drifting fog, and just beneath them, the faintest suggestion of movement. "The world below has forgotten," he said. "They no longer read. They no longer remember. They are adrift in noise. But silence calls to them. Stillness waits." Ansel approached the window, his breath catching. Through the mist, tiny lights flickered in the valley, soft, uncertain, like candles trying to find their wicks. Silence, like candles trying to find their wicks. Settlements, maybe? Villages clinging to shadowy edges? Yet something in them stirred. "Soon," the stranger said, "they will come to the tower. But they don't even know it exists." "They will. You must be here when they do." Later that night, back in the scriptorum, Anselm sat beneath the lantern's glow. The manuscript lay open once more. The soft linen had protected the ink, and the gold in the capital A still gleamed as if newly applied. He unwrapped the silver quill and held it between thumb and forefinger, just as he had done every day for years. But tonight, the weight of it felt different. No longer merely a tool. It was a conduit. He dipped the quill into the garnet red ink, and with careful breath, he began to write again. Not a prayer this time, but a memory. There is a tower that dreams in gears and light, and beneath it a man whose hand is not guided by duty, but by remembrance. Let this record endure, not for those who read, but for those who listen. The words came effortlessly, and as he wrote them, he heard it again, the faint, crystalline tick of the core above. With each line, the sound grew fuller. Not louder, simply more present, like something drawing nearer without movement. Then he felt it, a soft current, like wind through a cracked door, though no window stirred. He looked around the scriptorum and froze. Between the shelves of vellum scrolls and bound tomes, light shimmered faintly. Faint blue veins of energy, spiderwebbing across the stone floor in elegant, geometric patterns. Like the inside of a clock face, drawn in light, they pulsed in rhythm with the orb. Anselm set down his quill. He rose and followed the patterns, stepping slowly past shadowed alcoves and quiet cabinets. The glow guided him to the far wall. A portion of stone he had always assumed was part of the monastery's foundations, but now it flickered. He reached forward. His fingertips passed through the surface. Not stone at all, an illusion. or a veil beyond it, a hidden passage, lit with a quiet, blue glow. The corridor sloped downward, deeper into the earth than any monastery chamber he had ever known. The air was warm and dry, filled with a soft scent of ancient paper and oil. The walls were lined with narrow alcoves, each containing items he had never seen before. Glowing scrolls sealed with wax runes, silver discs etched with spiraling sigils, and books bound in metal and crystal. Anselm's breath slowed. His heart did not race. Instead, it calmed. He had not entered a vault. He had come home. At the end of the corridor stood a wide chamber, circular, with a domed ceiling painted with constellations. But unlike the night sky, these stars moved. In the center, a stone pedestal, and upon it, another silver quill, this one larger, older. Next to it sat an open book, blank save for a single line glowing in the center of the page. To the keeper of the last word, your ink is ready. Anselm approached. His hand hovered over the quill. He didn't need to ask what this was. This was the first instrument, forged when the Crescent Tower was born 1,000 years ago, used only once every age. Its nib shimmered faintly. Not silver, but light itself. He touched it, and the book came alive. Suddenly, memory flowed into him, not his own, but the memories of those who had come before. The scribes, the timekeepers, the illuminators. Their voices, their breaths, their visions. All poured into his hands. He saw the first architect of the tower, who carved its foundation from star-charged stone. He saw the monk, who transcribed the Codex of Whispers, a tome meant to calm the dying. He thought of the constant, the Tophen who carved his own. He saw the cloister gardener who bred glowing vines that climbed the clock's gears and kept it warm in winter. And he saw himself, younger, frail, determined. A boy bent over parchment, watched from the shadows by monks who smiled softly, knowing they had found the next keeper. Tears rolled down his cheeks. All of it had purpose. All of it had waited. He dipped the quill into a small well on the pedestal, filled with ink that shimmered with every color of every gem he had ever used, and wrote the first line in the great book. I am the last, but not the end. The book glowed softly beneath Brother Anselm's hand, its pages warming with an inner light that pulsed like the heartbeat of a living thing. He stood still for several moments, not thinking, not planning, simply breathing. The ink from the ancient silver quill had not dried. It shimmered as though the words themselves were alive, flexing with silent meaning. It's written, Creator, prayer. Every curve of the script glowed with quiet intent, and though the chamber remained empty, Anselm felt as though countless eyes watched, not with judgment, but with serenity. He stepped back from the pedestal. The domed ceiling above rotated slowly now, not physically but as a projection, stars gliding in slow orbit, forming constellations he had never learned in his training. These were older maps, forgotten skies, the kind only remembered by stones, clock gears, and buried manuscripts. Then he heard it, faint, low, and rhythmic. Not the ticking of the tower, but the whispering of words. Thousands of them, spoken softly in a chorus that floated down from the dome. Not a language he recognized, yet he understood. They were readings, recitations. Every illuminated passage he had ever penned, not aloud, but living now in sound. He turned slowly, and behind him the walls of the hidden chamber were changing. Symbols unfurled, light blossomed, and a large mechanical panel began to open in the floor. A stair descended, deeper still. He took the lantern and descended the winding staircase. The air cooled, but not unpleasantly. It was the sort of air one finds in old wine cellars or beneath cathedrals, dense with age and memory, yet strangely comforting. The staircase ended at a chamber of pure stone, perfectly round, utterly silent, and in its center, a device. Anselm stared. It was neither machine nor altar, yet somehow both. A brass framework shaped like an armillary sphere, with gears as thin as strands of hair moving within and without. At its center was a floating crystal prism, slowly spinning, reflecting soft gold and azure light across the walls. Beneath it, a dais inscribed with words in dozens of tongues. He approached and laid his hand gently on the rim of the sphere. It stirred. The gears spun faster, not in haste, but in purpose. Then, with a sigh, the crystal prism stopped rotating. From within it, a beam of light extended upward, projecting through a narrow tunnel in the ceiling, a perfect vertical channel that led back into the heart of the Crescent Tower. And through that beam, words began to rise. Not just words, books, prayers, maps, names, memories. Anselm's eyes widened. He understood. This was the transmission chamber. The core stored knowledge, but this was how it returned it to the world. Not by volume, not by speech, but through light, carried on fog, reflected in starlight, dispersed like pollen through the hills. The tower did not hold time. It breathed it back into the earth. And now it was ready, because he was ready. He spent the next 7 days in silence, not due to a vow, but because silence was necessary. In the upper scriptorum, he returned to his work, completing the hours of St. Elian, each line laid with reverent care, each flourish gilded with breath and gold leaf. He used the last of the crushed sapphire and a final shaving of opal for the illuminated border of the final page. Then he took the book to the hidden chamber beneath the pedestal and laid it beside the first instrument. He dipped the great silver quill one last time. Let the world remember itself. With that, the great clock in the Crescent Tower began to chime, not with bells, but with tones, soft harmonic pulses like singing glass or wind over the rim of an ancient urn. Each tone carried a story, a verse, a memory, broadcast not in sound alone, but in presence, made present in the fog beyond the hills. Things began to change. The village of Marnik, nestled on the outer edge of the forest, was the first to feel it. Children stared into the morning mist and said they saw light dancing, not like fire, but like letters made of breath. An old man, who hadn't read in years, woke with the urge to find a book. A gardener paused beside her arbor and swore she heard a voice, not speaking, but humming, as though the soil itself remembered a lullaby. And slowly, steadily, people began to look toward the hills, to the fog, to the tower. Back within the monastery, Anselm sat once more at his desk. But he was not writing now. He was listening. The transmission had begun. The scriptorum, once the quietest room in the world, now hummed softly. Not loud, but alive. The scrolls on the shelves shifted, ever so slightly, their bindings flexing, as if sighing. The pigments on the shelves shimmered more brightly in their glass files. Even the silver quill, now retired to its velvet case, seemed to glow with a memory of use. Anselm smiled faintly. Then, footsteps. He turned. The stranger stood in the doorway once more, but now his robe bore the symbol of the tower, a crescent gear encircling an open eye. "They are coming," he said. Anselm nodded. Will they remember? Some will, the young man replied. Others will simply feel peace. That is enough. He looked down at the old monk, his expression softening. You have wound the world again. Anselm gave a gentle, whispering chuckle. I only wrote what needed remembering. And that, said the stranger, is how time is kept. It began with one. A young girl, barefoot and silent, appeared at the gate of the monastery just after the 5th bell. The fog clung to her shoulders like a shawl, and her wide eyes held the reflection of something ancient and familiar. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Brother Anselm found her seated on the stone bench beneath the ivy-wrapped archway, where the wind played gently through the cloisters. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the tower. Tick-tock, tick-tock. He stood for a moment, watching her. She was no more than 10 years old. Her hair was tangled with bits of leaf and dew, and yet she looked entirely at home. He stepped forward. You've come far, he said softly. She nodded once, and only then did she open her mouth to speak. The fog told me her voice was soft but firm, as though she spoke on behalf of something far larger than herself. Anselm sat beside her in silence. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply listened to the wind and the steady pulse of the tower behind them. Before the bell struck again, more came. A weaver from a village over the ridge, a gardener with cracked hands, a pair of scholars who had left their academy to follow a dream. One by one they arrived, never all at once, never with explanation. Some brought nothing. Others carried books, old, crumbling, forgotten. Some held only questions they couldn't name. They came because the silence called them. By the 7th day, the monastery's once empty cloisters were no longer quiet with solitude. They were quiet with company. A stillness shared. The pilgrims did not chatter or bustle or demand. They listened to the towers ticking, to the breeze in the arches, to the echoes of footsteps on ancient stone. And slowly, Anselm realized they were not here to learn, not in the way schools taught. They were here to remember. He reopened the scriptorum, not as a workshop for one, but as a sanctuary for many. The long tables were dusted clean, blank parchment was laid out, bowls of pigment, azurite, garnet, gold, were set beside fresh quills, and still he said little. Instead, he showed them how to dip a quill, how to breathe in rhythm with the lines, how to gild the edge of a letter not with precision, but with kindness, how to feel a prayer through the page. They watched, they imitated. Some wept, not from sorrow, but from a long-awaited peace. One morning, a tall, silent man arrived, face weathered by wind and years. Around his neck, he wore a small pendant shaped like a key. He carried no bags, no offerings, only an old dog-eared book tied in cloth. He placed it on Anselm's table. I found this, he said, in the house where my father died. I never read it. I didn't know how, but the fog brought me here. Anselm unwrapped the book. Inside was a faded, illuminated page, a psalm written in deep red ink with flourishes of green and gold. He stared. I wrote this, he whispered. Psalm. He really shouldn't read it. He started to cry. You're calm. You're calm. He started. I wrote this, he whispered. Psalm. 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 The man looked startled. You did? Yes. 40 years ago. It was one of my first. He traced the margin with his fingertip. But I sent it into the world, never knowing where it would go. He closed the book gently, hands trembling. It came back. The stranger, the copper-eyed one, appeared once more as the sun touched the upper spire of the Crescent Tower. He walked among the pilgrims as if invisible, but Anselm saw him. They met beneath the old bell rope, where the tower's shadow spilled like ink across the courtyard. "You were right," Anselm said. "They're returning, not for answers, but for stillness." The stranger nodded. "The tower calls only those who need it. They come not for what I have written," Anselm murmured, "but for what they remember while reading." "Exactly," the stranger said. "The ink is not yours alone. It is theirs, too." Anselm looked up at the great gears above them. "Then what happens when I am gone?" The stranger offered him a small scroll, sealed in silver wax. "Then the tower will choose again." That night, Anselm returned to the scriptorum. He opened the scroll and read its contents aloud, though no one else was present. "The tower is not a place. It is a rhythm. When the world forgets to breathe, the gears turn. When the words grow faint, the ink flows. And when the last keeper has remembered enough, the next begins." He took up his old silver quill one final time. Not to write scripture, but to write a letter, a welcome, a whisper, a beginning. It is not empty. It is listening. You will find the quill where the ivy meets the clock's shadow. You will know it is yours by the warmth in your hand. You need not know what to write, only that writing is your way of remembering. Ink is just breath in another form, and the tower will teach you everything else. The candle burned low. Outside the fog rose again, soft and endless. And somewhere far below, in a distant village, a child turned her head and whispered to no one.